All right, everyone, this is Unit 8, East and Southeast Asia. We're learning Target 3, which is what the role of East and Southeast Asia is in the world economy today. Before we get going, we need to talk about the three types of most common types of economic systems in the world, and they are free market, command, and mixed. The free market system is based on private ownership. You should think the United States, think supply and demand, that the reason people open businesses is to make money. In command systems, and here's a vocab word, command system is when is an economy which is controlled by the government. Think communism. So the government controls what things are made, what things are sold, what prices things can be bought and sold for. And then actually the most common type of economic system is the mixed economic system, and it's a mix of free market and command. So for example, the United States, while we do have a free market system, we also have a little bit of command system in the fact that the government does control some parts of the economy. Think child labor laws, think of minimum wage laws, things that you can and can't do in businesses that the government determines. So now we know the different types of economic systems. Let's talk about some of the things that make countries in East and Southeast Asia some money. So first we're going to talk about agriculture. China has East Asia's most rural economy. Around 50% of their workers are farmers. Lots of people are needed to work the land because they still, in a lot of places, they still use very traditional tools. But despite that, China is still a leading producer of rice, wheat, and tea. And Chinese farmers also produce soybeans, cotton, jute, and silk, and then raise livestock. Since 1949, China's communist government has made a lot of changes to their country's agriculture. In the 1950s, they had the Great Leap Forward campaign, and it organized farmers into huge communes, and that's a vocab word. Communes are large farming communities where members share work and products equally, but the government decides which farming methods to use. The results were disastrous. When the crops dropped, famine swept throughout the country. So then in the 1980s, Chinese leaders reversed their agricultural policies. They encouraged smaller farms, jointly run by households, but with private garden plots. Farmers could sell and profit from any extra crops or animals. Chinese farmers now can grow enough crops to feed the whole country. Despite these agricultural reforms, many rural workers have begun moving to the cities to take jobs in industry and commerce where they can make more money. Most of Mongolia is used for grazing herds of sheep, goats, camels, and cattle. Until the early 1990s, Mongolia modeled its command economy on the Soviet Union's. They had large government-owned farms, and they set targets for producing milk and wool and grew food for people and animals. Although Mongolia's government still owns much of the country's limited farmland, Mongolian farmers and herders are slowly adapting to a market economy. South Korea is next. It's largely urbanized with a lot of industry, so their agricultural workforce only makes up about 10% of its population. Most South Korean farmers work on small family farms, but a farm labor shortage has developed as people continue to move to urban areas. To make up for the loss, South Korean agriculture increasingly uses modern machinery and more efficient farming practices. In North Korea, agriculture makes up about 25% of the economy and employs about 40% of all the workers. Farms in North Korea are organized into cooperatives, and this is a vocab word. Cooperatives are farms that are jointly operated by households. The communist government, however, still controls crop production and distribution and rations agricultural products. Corn, wheat, and milk are in short supply, and North Korea can't fully meet the needs of rice for its people, which is the country's major crop. Japan and Taiwan are largely industrialized, but agriculture does play a role in their economy. The physical geography challenges farmers in both countries. 4/5 of Japan is mountainous, and so they have to use terracing, modern machinery, and fertilizers, as well as irrigation to try to raise their crop yields. Japan's government also provides farmers with financial support to equalize rural and urban incomes. That means that they're trying to make sure that the farmers and people who live in the cities earn about the same. Despite these improvements, Japan still has to import about 35% of its food. Like Japan, Taiwan is mountainous. Rice, sugarcane, tea, bananas, and pineapple grow on limited, often terraced farmland. Once an exporter of these crops, Taiwan now focuses on industrial exports and imports a lot of its food. Right, in these last countries, the Philippines, Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam, and Myanmar, they are all in Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia's fertile river valleys and plains are a major source of livelihood for the people. They depend on the rich variety of crops grown in the areas to supply their own foods as well as to sell them for money. Even though Southeast Asia is industrializing pretty quickly, most of its workers are still involved in agriculture. More than 2/3 of all workers in Cambodia and Laos are farmers. And the major crop we're going to talk about is rice. They plant their fields with rice, the most important crop in Southeast Asia. They use more than half of the region's farmable land to grow rice. A major food source for the region, it's also leading export for Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, and Myanmar. Rice grows well in Southeast Asia because most of the region has fertile soil, an abundant water supply, and warm, wet climate. Some kinds of rice plants need a continuous supply of water from the time they are planted until just before harvest. Flooded rivers and abundant rainfall provide this water to Southeast Asia. In parts of Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam, seasonal flooding irrigates paddies, and that's a vocab word. Paddies are flooded fields in which rice is grown. Rain also provides enough water to grow rice in the Irrawaddy River Delta in Myanmar and parts of the Philippines. Farmers plant rice at the start of the rainy season, usually in May, and the crop is ready to harvest in October. They can then grow a second rice crop during the dry season by irrigating rice fields with water stored from rains and flooding rivers. Rice farming can be hard work because many of them don't use modern machinery. They plant and harvest their crops by hand, and they use simple tools like sickles, and that's another vocab word, and sickles are long, sharp, curved knives. Water buffalo or oxen are often used to pull the plows. Southeast Asia also grows yams, corn, bananas, and other food crops in areas that are too dry for a second planting of rice. Some Indonesian farmers have begun to grow cassava, an edible root, as an alternative subsistence crop because it's easier to grow than rice. And remember when we talked about subsistence farming, when you only grow enough to feed your family, we call those crops subsistence crops. Many families in Southeast Asia have small subsistence garden plots that produce vegetables, and they might raise pigs or chickens for food. Plantations in Southeast Asia's coastal lowlands provide many of the region's cash crops, and here's another vocab word. Cash crops are crops raised to be sold for profit. Rubber is an important cash crop, and Thailand, Indonesia, and Malaysia lead the world in natural rubber production. Sugarcane grows in the Philippines and on the Indonesian island of Java. The Philippines is also one of the largest producers and exporters of coconuts. Other regional exports are coffee, palm oil, and spices. Right now let's move on to another way that Southeast Asia makes money, and that's through forestry and mining. Forestry, which includes jobs in logging, transporting logs, and manufacturing finished products, is important in a lot of Southeast Asian countries. It's a major industry in Vietnam, where factories produce plywood and lumber, pulp and paper, and furniture products. Myanmar leads the world in teakwood exports. Teakwood, ebony, mahogany, and bamboo, in the form of lumber and finished products, are vital to the economies of Malaysia, the Philippines, Indonesia, and Thailand. Although excessive logging has contributed to deforestation in the region, several Southeast Asian countries are working to make their economic goals compatible with environmental goals. Rich mineral deposits lie within Southeast Asia's numerous mountains. Workers in several countries drill and blast their way to deposits of tin, iron ore, manganese, and tungsten. Malaysia, Thailand, and Indonesia are three of the world's leading producers of tin. Iron ore is excavated in Malaysia and the Philippines. Manganese, which is used to strengthen steel, is mined in the Philippines and Indonesia. Tungsten is used for electrical materials and in steel alloys, and it's found in Myanmar and Thailand. The economies of Southeast Asia also benefit from oil extraction. Malaysia is rich in petroleum and natural gas reserves. Crude oil, natural gas, and petroleum products account for 95% of the export income of Brunei. This small country also has been one of the world's largest natural gas plants. Indonesia, the largest producer of petroleum in the region, is one of the top 10 producers in the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC. Economic development in the Indonesian-owned western part of New Guinea and on the Indonesian isle of Sumatra, Java, and Borneo has been spurred by the building of pipelines. These pipelines carry oil from drilling sites to the coasts for shipping. Let's move into the industry part of the economy of East and Southeast Asia, and we'll start with Japan. With the aid of the United States, Japan's economy grew quickly after World War II. They had a highly skilled workforce, and they had the latest technology, and that helped them dramatically develop its industries. Within just a few decades, the Japanese were leading producers of ships, cars, cameras, computers, telecommunication products, and consumer goods. By the 1990s, world demand for Japan's high-quality goods had made it a global economic power. After the Korean War, South Korea rapidly moved from an agricultural to an industrial economy. By the 1980s, South Korean industries had begun exporting ships, steel, electronic equipment, and motor vehicles. Like other Asian countries, South Korea suffered an economic downturn in the 90s. With international financial aid, however, they soon began rebuilding the economy. In North Korea, government-owned heavy industries produce machinery, chemicals, and military equipment. But because so many resources go to their military forces, production of consumer goods suffers. By the early 90s, North Korea had depended on the Soviet Union for economic aid, and when they broke apart, North Korea's industrial output fell by half, and it forced its communist leaders to trade with Japan and South Korea. Today, North Korea's economy still lags behind other countries as far as industrial development. In Taiwan, it has one of the most successful export-based economies, so they sell a lot of things to other countries. Until the 60s, the island had exported a surplus of agricultural products and invested the profits as well as American and Japanese financial aid in manufacturing. Taiwan's new industries specialize in textiles, plastics, and electronic goods for export. Their economic boom transformed Taiwan into a major trading country. Today, about 60% of the people in Taiwan work in service industries like finance and communications. Technology-based products like computers and precision instruments are replacing traditional manufactured goods as their major source of income. Let's move to China. When the communist leaders came to power in 1949, they used government controls to boost their output. Today, Chinese government still controls major industries like textiles, clothing, food, footwear, toys, and plastics. Many state-run factories, however, lack the updated technology incentives for improved performance. So to get the economy going, they adopted a few new, some features of a market economy. For example, small privately owned businesses are allowed to operate and foreign companies' investments are welcomed. Many of the most prosperous industries now lie in special economic zones along the southeastern coast where they can operate without government controls on price, production, and distribution. With market reforms, China's economy is growing at a remarkably high rate. Standards of living have risen, especially in the cities, but the country still faces economic challenges. A large gap separates wealthier industrial areas on the coast from poor agricultural areas in the interior. As unprofitable state-run industries close, unemployment increases. Industrial growth and few environmental safeguards have contributed to rising pollution. And that was East Asia, so we'll move to Southeast Asia, and we'll start with Singapore. Singapore has Southeast Asia's most developed economy. Its location and harbors make it a major port and manufacturing center. In addition, Singapore's government and businesses have carried out several policies that have led to strong economic growth. After independence in 1965, they set up free trade zones that attracted foreign investment. More recently, businesses have focused on developing communications, information, and financial services, activities less dependent on foreign investment. Singapore's economy has also moved away from labor-intensive industries like textiles into electronics and oil refining. To ensure a supply of skilled workers for these industries, the government has also made a strong commitment to education. Let's move on to Malaysia, which is Singapore's neighbor. They have also diversified or increased its economic activities. Although Malaysia remains a major producer of natural rubber and palm oil, it now also manufactures a variety of goods like electronic and electrical products, cement, chemicals, and processed foods. The country also has developed heavy industries like steelmaking and automobile assembly. These manufactured products, along with natural rubber and palm oil, account for most of Malaysia's export earnings. Malaysia is also the world's largest exporter of microchips, making it an important center for information technology. All right, now let's talk about trade in East and Southeast Asia, and we're going to start with East Asia. In recent decades, East Asian countries have become more interdependent with one another and the rest of the world. As in other world regions, East Asia has formed trading partnerships. Like we have NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement. They have one similar. China, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan are members of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Group, or APEC. And that is a vocab word, and APEC tries to ensure that trade among the member countries is efficient and fair. Still, trade disputes and deeply rooted political differences continue to affect their international relations. We're going to start with Japan. They only have a few mineral resources, so they depend on international trade for its economic well-being. To produce the vast range of products for foreign buyers, Japanese industries import raw materials like iron ore and fuels. The Japanese government, however, places high taxes on many imported and finished goods. These taxes protect many Japanese industries from foreign competition, but they restrict what other countries can sell to Japan. The term balance of trade refers to the difference in value over time between a country's imports and exports. High import taxes, along with the high global demand for Japanese goods, cause Japan to have a trade surplus with other countries. And this is a vocab word, and we'll put it right down here. A trade surplus occurs when exports exceed imports. So basically when they sell more things than they buy on the world market. Trade surpluses bring increased wealth to Japan, but the resulting trade imbalances mean lower profits for Japan's trading partners, which would be the United States. And so that creates a trade deficit. And this is another vocab word. A trade deficit occurs when a country imports more goods than it exports. In recent years, the U.S. and other countries have tried to persuade Japan to open its market. The results are mixed. Trade policy, therefore, continues to complicate Japan's relations with other countries. Let's move on to China. In an effort to modernize its economy, China has tried to increase trade with the United States and other countries. The U.S. also favors increased trade because they have a growing economy and they have more than 1 billion potential customers. It's hard to give that up. But there is a major stumbling block, and that is in China's human rights history. And this is where another vocab word comes in. China has typically had harsh treatment of dissidents, which are citizens who speak out against the government policies. And we know in the United States we have freedom of speech, and so that doesn't make us very happy when China punishes people for speaking out. The United States, Japan, and other important trading countries have tried to influence China to respect people's human rights in response to to China, these countries have placed economic sanctions or trade restrictions on China. In response to economic losses, China released several dissidents from prison, and the U.S. lifted sanctions in the past. All right, let's move on to Southeast Asia. In recent years, Southeast Asian countries have become more interdependent. And here's another vocab word. Interdependent just means that they're more reliant on one another. As they draw closer together, economic and political developments in one country can affect another country in the region. Two organizations formed to promote regional development, trade, and greater economic stability to reflect this increasing interdependence. The first one is the Asian Development Bank, or the ADB, and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN. The ADB, based in the Philippines capital of Manila, provides international loans to aid the economies of Asian member countries. In Southeast Asia, these ADB loans support agricultural, transportation, and industrial development projects. Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand formed ASEAN in 1967 as an economic and political alliance. Brunei joined in 1984, and Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar all became members in the late 1990s. Its main goals are to promote economic growth and to encourage cultural exchanges among member countries. It also provides an outlet for cooperation in a region that's long known economic and political conflict, although full political or economic unity is not its main focus. The founding members generally have a greater economic success than other countries in Southeast Asia. Development has been slow or non-existent in countries that joined ASEAN later, and also in East Timor, which is not yet joined. The member countries try to balance diverse national goals while struggling for regional unity. In 1992, they agreed to establish a free trade area and to reduce tariffs on non-agricultural products by 2008. Okay, we've talked about the good things that are going for the economies of East and Southeast Asia, but let's talk about some of there'll be three things that can hurt their economy. The first one is our natural disasters. As we learned earlier in Learning Target 1, most of Southeast Asia is part of the Ring of Fire. Residents along here periodically face volcanic eruptions, flash floods, and typhoons. These natural disasters can take their toll on human lives and on economic development. Their efforts to cope with the effects of disasters are part of everyday life in parts of Southeast Asia. Volcanic mountains rise on most of the larger islands in the Philippines. Several of the volcanoes are active, and people have to cope with the constant threat of volcanic activity. Flash floods in Southeast Asia kill hundreds of people a year and ruin about 10 million acres of crops. Human activity often magnifies the effects of these floods. Tropical storms often strike various parts of Southeast Asia. And here's a vocab word. A cyclone is an area of low atmospheric pressure surrounded by circulating winds extending out from 100 to 1,000 miles. Tropical cyclones are particularly deadly storms. You can think of a cyclone kind of like a tornado, but on a much bigger scale and coming from the ocean. A typhoon is a tropical storm or a tropical cyclone that forms in the Pacific Ocean. From 8 degrees to 15 degrees north of the equator, often between July and November. Typhoon winds circulate in a counterclockwise direction. So you kind of think of a typhoon like a hurricane. Southeast Asians are taking steps to control the damage from typhoons, but sometimes that's hard. The second economic problem we're going to talk about is the power dilemma of East Asia. Excuse me. Economic growth has increased the demand for electric power to operate businesses and industries. And in addition, rising standards of living mean that people tend to buy and use more appliances and electronic devices. Therefore, finding adequate sources of electric power has become a vital issue for the countries of the region. The second economic problem we're going to talk about is the power dilemma of East Asia. Excuse me. Economic growth has increased the demand for electric power to operate businesses and industries. And in addition, rising standards of living mean that people tend to buy and use more appliances and electronic devices. Therefore, finding adequate sources of electric power has become a vital issue for the countries of the region. Some of East Asia's power comes from hydroelectric plants, but most is produced from the burning of fossil fuels like coal, oil, or natural gas. China, North Korea, and Mongolia produce most of their power using coal from large reserves. Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan, however, don't have a lot of coal, natural gas, or oil, so they must import these resources to produce their energy. About 65% of Japan's electricity comes from plants burning coal, natural gas, or petroleum, as does about 60% of South Korea's power. Burning fossil fuels, however, leads to acid rain, air pollution, and possibly global warming. East Asian countries have begun to search for cleaner power sources. And then if we look at nuclear energy, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan rely on nuclear energy for 30 to 40% of their electrical power. Japan has more than 50 nuclear power generators. South Korea has 12, Taiwan has 8. North Korea is not known to have any nuclear power facilities. China's few reactors currently produce just about 1% of their electricity, but China's plans for the future include 100 more nuclear power plants. During the late 90s, a series of accidents in Japan and South Korea exposed hundreds of people to radiation and raised public fears about the safety of nuclear power. People also worried that the earthquakes and volcanic activity common in the region could cause reactors to crack and release radiation. All right, and then let's move to the last economic problem, and that's environmental concerns. In China's urban areas, the use of outdated technology and transportation industry has caused major air pollution. In fact, 9 of the 10 cities worldwide with the worst air pollution are in China. One major cause is their heavy reliance on coal. And northern industrial areas, wind-blown dust adds to the air pollution. As a result, large numbers of people living in the area suffer from lung disease. Acid rain from burning coal also is a serious problem in the industrial region of southeast China. Neighboring countries are affected by China's acid rain as well. Forests in Japan, for example, suffer not only from Japan's own coal-burning power plants, but also from China's coal-generated pollution. China and other rapidly urbanizing countries like Taiwan and South Korea also have trouble disposing of waste products. For example, 80% of the cities in China, and this was a few years ago, didn't have any sewage treatment facilities. Industrial waste from factories poses health risks to urban population in parts of China. For years, an important metal company in a Chinese city spewed huge amounts of sulfur dioxide and other harmful chemicals into the atmosphere. In 2000, China responded to pleas from city residents who had long complained of health problems caused by the plant's toxic emissions. For the first time, China closed down a state-run factory for environmental reasons. China has also begun responding to other serious environmental issues, including deforestation. Each year, China clears thousands of acres of forests and vegetation to meet the demand for lumber. Deforestation caused by clear-cutting timber leads to soil erosion. Without trees to slow runoff from rain, large-scale soil erosion and flooding occur. As heavy rains wash away large amounts of unprotected soil in deforested areas, soil deposits build up in rivers. The buildup causes waters to rise even higher than they otherwise might have, and flooding becomes more severe. A related concern is desertification, and I believe this is a vocab word. Desertification, and we've had this one before, is when grasslands become drier and desert areas expand. Along China's eastern borders with Mongolia, grasslands and desert meet. The grasses there are drought resistant, but overgrazing and soil erosion have depleted much of the vegetation. The resulting desertification has contributed to dust and sandstorms in northern and western areas of China. All right, now let's look at North Korea, South Korea, and Taiwan. Urban areas in these three countries are plagued with air and water pollution due to lax industrial controls. Untreated sewage contaminates water supplies and threatens the health of humans and wildlife. Although nuclear energy provides inexpensive power for South Korea, the waste from these plants remains radioactive for tens of thousands of years and is difficult to dispose of safely. All right, let's look at Mongolia. Environmental challenges in Mongolia resemble those of Western China. Deforestation caused by logging and desertification caused by overgrazing have contributed to soil erosion. Burning coal pollutes the air, and safe drinking water supplies are limited. Okay, now let's look at Southeast Asia. Increased prosperity in Southeast Asia has raised people's expectations about their quality of life. Economic growth, however, also depletes limited environmental resources. Increased manufacturing raises standards of living but also creates industrial waste. Growing populations and crowded conditions in such cities like Bangkok, Manila, and Jakarta raise concerns about adequate housing, water supply, sanitation, and traffic control. In recent years, these cities' heat, humidity, and pollution levels have increased at a rate higher than the global average. Higher temperatures affect both humans and their environment, causing health problems and trapping pollutants in the air that contribute to acid rain. Because of the strict law enforcement, Singapore is an exception in a region of polluted cities. In Singapore, littering the sidewalk can get you a $250 fine. Deforestation is a major concern throughout Southeast Asia. Mining of valuable minerals and metals has also led to environmental abuses. In Indonesia, they dump large amounts of rock waste into the river. It'll divert the river from its original course, and then flooding more areas, and then displacing people. And then also with volcanoes and forest fires, those natural disasters, they also pollute rural areas and make it harder for them to clean up. So that is pretty much it for Learning Target 3. Go ahead and do your summary and be ready for the Socrative quiz in a few days.